Right, hello everyone. We have our next presentation from Phoebe Lockhart talking about pro bono assistance in Nebraska. And so another great presentation and good luck to you.
So good afternoon. My name is Phoebe Lockhart again, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you today and also the opportunity to develop this capstone over the last 5.5 weeks at Mount Vernon, and also with the help of my mentor, Caitlin Mumau-Briney. So my program is called LEAP Counsel, and it's a pro bono legal assistance program for people living in poverty in Nebraska, where I'm from, that also has a component of having pre-law undergraduate students provide some of the basic assistance leading up to that representation. But before I begin my presentation, I want to admit the obvious. I'm not a lawyer, nor am I even a law student yet. So I would like to kind of introduce where I got interested in this topic. And it started with a picture on the right-hand side. That's me, age 6, on my dad's desk. I thought I was a chief negotiator at that time. But then when I was 10, I drafted my first contract after I had negotiated with my parents about how much laptop and television time that I would get. I made sure I'd hold them to their word. So I made a contract, had them sign it. It even has an expiration clause, and that's my dog's signature at the bottom for the notary. He was my witness. So I've been interested in the law, contracts, that sort of thing from a very early age, and I like to think that I've developed those skills over time to where I am now, which is here. And I've been a legal intern for the last 2 years in a local, small town, small firm, rural law firm in Ogallala, Nebraska, which is where I'm from. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to have a great mentoring attorney who has helped me develop an appreciation and love for the law. And he's also given me a lot of responsibility, which is where some of my legal experience comes into with this program. This is my most proud document that I've created. It was a memorandum brief in federal court, District Court of Nebraska. And it just shows that I've really had an opportunity to develop my legal skills to understand how case law, statutes, the underlying stakeholders impact an issue, and I'm definitely taking those experiences with me as I develop my project. So a lot of times at Mount Vernon, we've talked about one fundamental experience that's happened to us that's changed our path and created this cause in our hearts. And for mine, it's that pin on the right-hand side, which may not seem related to law. It's not a gavel or the scales of justice. In fact, it's about the size of a quarter, and I carry it with me every day. It's a guardian angel pin. My first year as a legal intern, after a case was decided, our client came up to me and she handed me a guardian angel pin, and she told me that I was her guardian angel of the courtroom. And that was just an incredibly powerful experience for me, and it made me realize that the job of a lawyer and the career I was entering to was to be an advocate for someone in the courtroom. And that's kind of the mentality that I've adopted and what inspired me to create a program where students and lawyers would have the opportunity to be a sort of courthouse guardian for others. But as I told you earlier, I work at a small town, small firm with only one in-staff lawyer. But when I went to college 5 hours away, I noticed that there was a different culture in big corporate law where there's firms of 50 or more lawyers. And there was this dedication or focus on billable hours sheets, how much time the attorneys were billing. And that's what I'm showing on the left-hand side here. And this has become a mentality called in the law that we call pay to play. So the more opportunities that lawyers have to introduce documents into the legal system, there's sort of that pay to play, because it costs lawyers to make these documents, but then the more that you file in court, the more expensive it becomes for a civil litigation case to enter the courthouse. In fact, many civil cases can become $10,000, $40,000 to go through the court system. So what I'm afraid of and what I'm trying to protect with my project is that these billable hour sheets are going to start covering what's the underlying goal of the court system, which is advocacy. And it's not centered around billable hours, and I'm trying to design that with my program. So once I knew that I was interested in the law, I started to think about how I could take that guardian of the courtroom mentality and apply it to people who need it the most. And what I realized, that there's a growing number of people living in poverty in Nebraska, and that was who I wanted to reach with my program, because it's what I like to call a phenomenon called courthouse admission. It costs to enter the courtroom. And that's a difference between what we consider with the criminal side of law. There's criminal and civil, and with criminal you can get a public defender, but with civil you're kind of locked outside the courthouse if you don't have those admission costs. So currently, about 220,000 people in Nebraska live in poverty. But what's a more interesting statistic was from Talk Poverty, an institution in 2015, which estimated that 70% of people living in poverty do not have access to civil representation in the courthouse. So if we were to picture that in Nebraska, it would look something like this. So this is how many people represented by the 220,000 that are living in Nebraska today who the courthouse doors are closed on simply because they cannot afford legal services. It's an interesting phenomenon because we often think that people save for things like retirement, marriages, even insurance, but no one saves with the idea of somehow in the future having a civil representation problem that they're going to have in the future, which is why these kind of advocacy programs are so important. So this is the phenomenon that I like to call the civil legal gap. So we have two different populations. One is the people living in poverty, and the other is the attorneys who can offer the service that they need with civil representation. But there's this growing disconnect, whether it's where they live geographically in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Omaha, Nebraska, or where they frequent. And so what's happening is there's this growing disconnect that people in poverty do not know how to access these services that lawyers offer, and lawyers aren't aware of the problems that exist in their own communities. So in fact, the Nebraska State Bar Association's Volunteer Lawyers Project introduced a video in 2013, and they said that 1,422 eligible Nebraska citizens were denied civil representation in 2013. So this is simply just those who were denied. It doesn't even take into account how many people never tried to enter the courts, who had a civil problem but did not know how to approach it. So what I'm trying to address is this civil legal gap. The people in the middle who have no means of entering the courthouse with a problem that they've been faced with. And this is why I've created a new pro bono vision for how I think the Nebraska court system should operate. And Mount Vernon, we've talked a lot about our why we are interested in this project, and what's the underlying accomplishment that we hope to get through with this project. And for me, it's threefold: providing legal literacy, empowerment, and most importantly, that advocacy in the courtroom. And I'm hoping to accomplish this via civil representation for those living in poverty, and also a mentorship component for pre-law students, in which pre-law students will have the opportunity to screen potential clients and match them with attorneys who have the same expertise. But before I talk about the program in detail, I want to talk about the kind of cases that would be offered with this program. And I chose 6 specific kinds for a few reasons. First, the National Bar Association's annual report on pro bono advocacy in 2014 estimated that the primary reason that attorneys are willing to offer pro bono service is when a case has a definite end to a timeline. So they know they'll be able to complete it in a definite amount of time, and there will not be this backlash a year later down the road. So for that reason, I chose 6 relatively simple but definitely needed types of civil cases. The first being uncontested divorces. Next being landlord-tenant and homeowners disputes, which is increasingly important for people living in poverty because they disproportionately live in apartment housing. The third would be Chapter 7 simple bankruptcy. And the fourth, which I'll come back to later in addition, is estate planning. The majority of people living in poverty do not have a will. They do not have any estate planning to give closure to their loved ones, no healthcare power of attorney when they become elderly and in need of assistance. So this is definitely something important that lawyers can easily offer that are not offering it currently. The fifth being a civil restraining order to provide protection for victims. And then the sixth being credit repair, which may seem like something that an individual can press on their own, but lawyers often have more success contacting these credit agencies and repairing a person's credit. So now that you kind of understand what kind of cases that I hope to offer with the Lead Counsel program, I want to walk you through how this program works, since there are a lot of different audiences and complex steps with how this would operate. The first step would be the potential client has to identify a legal need. It might be an opportunity they're presented with. It might be an impending divorce. Something in their life has to happen that leads them to seek legal advice or representation. And then through a variety of outreach programs, namely going to docket days in courthouses where they're already embarking on pro se, or is what we call self-representing, and also contacting nonprofit institutions that already target these individuals, we hope to have outreach in which pre-law students can meet with these potential clients in a courthouse and start recording the info, screening the case, And the pre-law student will uniquely have an opportunity to interview a client and start taking the timeline of his case, which is increasingly important for pre-law students because undergraduate pre-law students often don't have an opportunity to experience what it means to be a lawyer before they go to law school and take on $200,000 in debt. So this is a great opportunity for pre-law students in undergrad to know whether they want to go on to law school and eventually become a lawyer. So after they record the info, meet with the client, they're going to use the current database, which is the Nebraska Lawyers Referral Service, which will hopefully have a pro bono component added to that database as well, to type in what their expertise, the current case is related to. So if it's a uncontested divorce, they would be matched with an attorney that already has that expertise and has indicated that they would be willing to offer pro bono service. So once that match is identified, the student will then contact the attorney, reach out to them, and see if they would be willing to provide that representation. At that point, this is the mentorship component, where the attorney will meet with the student and mentor them via this case, whether that's describing them what it means to be a lawyer or identifying some ways that the student can facilitate in a small role in that case, and also just establishing that network for that pre-law undergrad student. And because of that disconnect that I talked about earlier between people living in poverty and the lawyers, the student's going to serve as that middleman to facilitate that contact between the attorney and client. Because of attorneys' busy schedules, it's easier for the student to make the contact, to save the time for the attorney to do the things that they need to do that matter most for that case. And then eventually the attorney is going to serve that client, whether that's appearing in court for them, signing a legal document, or arranging a settlement. And then eventually on the client side, we hope to improve legal literacy, understanding of their case and their unique situation. After the case goes to the courthouse, it's resolved, there's closure, the Nebraska State Bar Association, and through this program, hopefully that they'll adopt, will conduct evaluations and referrals to this program to understand how this closure was achieved and referrals going forward. So there's 4 primary audiences that I'd like to address with my cause. The first obviously being the clients themselves, who can be reached through the docket days, the nonprofits, libraries, women's centers, domestic violence institutions that already have these at-risk individuals. And then the second being the pre-law students who would obviously gain experience and mentorship through this program. Then the attorneys, who will be most important to communicate to them that this is not a time-intensive activity once the screening's already been done. And then finally, Nebraska State Bar Association, who would oversee the program and provide that needed institutional support. So with our logic model at Mount Vernon, we talk a lot about inputs and outputs. So for my inputs, obviously there will be the student volunteer hours, the pro bono service, the screening documents. So when a student is presented with a case, they'll have a comprehensive screening document that can identify whether it's a viable case before moving forward to contact a potential attorney. And then at the end, I hope to get the matches, the representation, the volunteer hours, and then also the wills, the power of attorney, the other legal documents. And this will undoubtedly require a few resources. In the first 2 years, I hope to gain the support of 50 pre-law students, whether that's at my own university, at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We also have a pre-law club and a pre-law professional center. And then I also hope to, either through crowdsourcing or tapping into the Nebraska State Bar Association's current resources, to gain $5,000 purely for court fees. Because what a lot of people often don't know is that it's not just the pro bono hours that they're dedicating to this cause. There's also money that has to be paid to the county clerk's office, so that's what that funding would be used for. So because of the complexity involved with my program, and also because I don't have the credibility or expertise to implement the screening forms and things like that, I have a 2-year action plan to get the program up and running. After leaving Mount Vernon in 2016, I hope to partner with those who have more knowledge on the situation than I do to gather that expert support, whether that be attorneys that are already offering pro bono service in Nebraska, law professionals, law professors, and then I hope to work with them to develop the screening forms for each of the 6 different types of cases that I've identified. And then at the end of 2016, I hope to propose lead counsel at the Nebraska State Bar Association meeting. Going forward, hoping to get approval at that stage, I would like to work with their computer science specialists to integrate the pro bono aspect into their current lawyer referral database. And then I also hope to form relationships with those nonprofits that already serve these at-risk individuals at that time. And then recognizing that pre-law students are such an integrative part of this program, I hope to begin the pilot program in August of 2017 when school starts at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So after the pilot program is already launched in 2018, I hope to evaluate, modify the program, make changes as necessary, and also launch stage 2 of my session, which focuses on not only advocacy and representation, but empowerment through knowledge. And that'll be something similar to the WIL informational sessions, in which a pre-law student would have the opportunity to speak with an attorney in a particular specialty and develop a PowerPoint presentation and make a presentation to nonprofits that are hosting these at-risk individuals. So the student might be able to describe the importance of a will, what necessary documentation they have to get to facilitate a will, and then hopefully taking intake forms and then later distributing those wills to those individuals in a few weeks after the informational sessions. And then in 2018, I also just want to work on improving my outreach, so distributing courthouse materials about the programs, whether that's to the judges themselves when they see pro se or self-representing clients, the county clerk's office, any place that these people who knew they have a legal problem might go for help so they can learn about the program. But I also recognize that inherently there are going to be a few challenges to my program, namely sustainability, especially since I am a junior and I'll be graduating soon. But I hope to continue this into law school as well, and I think it would be a great partnership between an undergraduate institution and a law school to develop that mentorship capacity as well. So I hope to, once I go to law school, also continue to develop this program. I also recognize the credibility issue, that I am just a junior in college, I haven't been a lawyer, and so that's why I'm working with other lawyers, law professors, experts in the field to develop those screening forms and also implement informational sessions for those pre-law students at the beginning of the year so they know how to properly screen a client. And then the third challenge is simply measurability and evaluating that long-term success. How do I measure a renewed sense of legitimacy and trust in the court system, or informational empowerment through legal advocacy? Those certainly aren't easy questions to answer, and so evaluating that qualitative side of long-term success, especially in my community, will be difficult. And I chose this graphic for one reason, and that's the fact that the scales of justice are unbalanced. And that comes into the reality of success, like a program like this, is that the scales of justice will never be completely balanced, and I acknowledge that. But I'm definitely comfortable with and proud to, in any way, to sort of balance those scales a little bit more and hopefully have some short-term and long-term success in doing so. So short-term, define the next 2 years with the action plan that we talked about earlier. I hope to have 100 case screenings in the first 2 years and trickle that down to 50 actual court representations, negotiations, settlement, that sort of thing. And then that stage 2, like we talked about earlier with the legal education presentations, I hope to have 25 of those given by pre-law students to nonprofits in my community. And then long-term success, looking 2 years and beyond, I hope to facilitate that student mentorship and also law school retention and training. I think it's a compelling proposition for the Nebraska State Bar Association to introduce a program like this, if not for the reason that students will gain that network and be able to identify the laws and the case law in our community and maybe choose to stay in Nebraska so we can avoid that brain drain problem in the Midwest, and that'll increase their retention in the schools because they've already established a network and community in Nebraska. And then for the client side, I hope to improve the legal literacy, the empowerment for the clients, and then a renewed sense of trust in the courts, so people don't feel like the courthouse doors close on them because they're unable to afford representation. And so earlier in the presentation, I gave you a statistic about 1,422 people that were denied legal service. And I called it the civil legal gap, but now I'm going to call it the civil legal bridge, because I think by adding the expertise of both the Nebraska State Bar Association and the pre-law students who will facilitate the screening, we can bridge that disconnect and hopefully have 0 people in 10 years in 2023 that were denied legal assistance. So thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I'd welcome any questions. Thank you. Yeah, so the Nebraska State Bar Association already has a volunteer lawyers project that they're already pouring institutional operational costs into. So I would hope to propose this as like an addition or, you know, a way to improve their program and hopefully tap into those institutional resources that they already get through their bar admission subscriptions that they have for lawyers every year. But I would also be open to, when these students contact an attorney, ask if they would be willing to provide pro bono representation. Sometimes it's not a convenient time of the year for an attorney to take that client, at which time I would ask them if they would be willing to make a donation to the cause in general. So, yeah.
I love the project. I love the ambition. I love the passion.
Thank you.
Infectious. I just want to jump up and be a lawyer. What kind of connections do you have in the Nebraska State Bar Association? Obviously, your attorney mentor is a member of the bar. So do you feel, I mean, how big of a reach is that, the chance to present this to?
Yeah, so I was actually really lucky that my mentoring attorney was actually on the executive council for the Bar Association about 5 years ago. And he actually set up a meeting, like a breakfast meeting, where I was able to just speak with the president of the Bar Association. So I do have that network as well. And then I'm also have a good relationship with a couple of law professors from Nebraska Law, since they're very close in proximity to the undergraduate college. And a few professors have indicated they would be like willing to help with proposing this. So yeah, John.
So I had two questions. First was, you have very specific types of cases you'll take, and they're all mostly family related. But most lawyers are corporate attorneys across the United States. So how do you match the people with their skills, or the skills with the type of cases you take? And also, the second question kind of, what would happen if everybody's like, oh, lead counsel, Phoebe Lockhart, these things are great, and you get 5,000 applications in your first year, and you don't have enough pre-law students, you don't have enough attorneys, this is not what you do.
Okay, so with the first question, I think it depends on the state. I know that corporate attorneys, at least in Nebraska, are not as prevalent compared to maybe like Virginia or something like that. But something that I'd eventually like to expand is offering that pro bono support for nonprofit startup institutions in my community, and that would be a great avenue for corporate lawyers to offer their service, whether that's establishing the 501c3 and helping in that capacity. But also, I think there's opportunities for the credit repair. I know the corporate lawyers that I've had experience with do have some knowledge of how those credit institutions work, and I think that would also be a good avenue. And then your second question was about like an influx of people, right? If they were, I don't anticipate that, just because there's currently such a poor outreach given to these community members, so they don't even know that these programs will exist. I would certainly be very pleased that people would aware of those services, and at that time I think it would be a good opportunity to expand. I think there's currently 2,000 or so students at the University of Nebraska that have a designation of pre-law on their transcript. So there's certainly room for growth if more students would be interested in facilitating this project. Doug again.
I have another question. It has to do with, you know, as you're planning, thinking about the training for the pre-law students, because the quality of their work has to be there, and there's got to be ethical training involved. So just where does that fit into your kind of vision for how it's going to evolve?
Absolutely. I envision that that would actually start August, like when the students return, and then that would have to be led by lawyers that are already in that field. And the idea is that the screening documents would be very black and white, so it would start off with kind of what's used for entry-level associate attorneys who are interviewing clients for the first time, and firms want to make sure that those interviews are conducted properly. So it would be similar to that. I've also had the opportunity to get some screening documents from like legal services, legal aid, those kind of nonprofits that have already had kind of the tested, tried and true questions. But there's also, there would have to be some definitely long-term training sessions where we talk about the ethics of helping someone, you know, attorney-client privilege, that it's not their right to disclose this information, and how to effectively communicate the timeline of the case and also not offer legal advice themselves, right, because they're not lawyers as well. So that would definitely have to be very strict in terms of rules, just because of the nature of the sensitivity of the problem. Great. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.